The smell of garlic and burnt butter was the first thing that told me tonight would be long. I'd worked the dinner rush at Palazzo Nero for 8 months, long enough to know the difference between a table that would tip well and one that would leave me counting loose change on a sticky vinyl cloth, long enough to memorize the weight of a full tray against my forearm, the precise angle to hold it so the wine glasses wouldn't sing against each other. Long enough to become invisible. That was the goal anyway, invisible. My black uniform, pressed every morning at 5:30 before Lily woke up, had a small ink stain near the second button that no amount of soaking had removed. I'd stopped seeing it months ago. My manager, Rosario, hadn't. He'd mentioned it twice this week with that particular tone he reserved for staff he considered replaceable. I smiled both times. That smile cost me something I couldn't name. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a building in the older part of the city, the kind of block where the stonework was genuine and the rents were obscene. Palazzo Nero had thick velvet drapes the color of old wine, low amber lighting, and a menu written entirely in Italian that most customers pretended to understand. The clientele was the kind that didn't check prices, the kind that arrived in cars I'd never be able to afford even if I worked here for a decade. I moved between tables with practiced efficiency, my sneakers, the good ones, the only ones, silent against the dark hardwood. Section 4 was mine tonight, 3 tables near the far wall, partially separated from the main dining room by an ornate wooden partition. It was considered the best section, private, quiet, reserved for guests Rosario never introduced by name. The reservation had come in that afternoon. A table for 4, listed simply as Conti Party, that was all. I'd set it myself. Fresh flowers, the heavier silverware, the crystal glasses that had to be polished individually and held to the light to check for streaks. Rosario had watched me do it with arms crossed, saying nothing, which was his version of approval. By 9 o'clock, the main dining room hummed with conversation and the low brass notes of whatever jazz record Rosario played on repeat. I was refilling a water glass at table 12 when I heard the entrance change. Not a sound, exactly, more like a shift in pressure, the way a room adjusts when something significant enters it. I didn't look up immediately. That was a rule I'd made for myself early on. Never be caught staring. But I noticed the way the hostess straightened. The way the bartender, a heavy-set man named Gio who laughed at everything, went still. The way even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to soften, as if the room itself was being careful. I turned toward section 4. 4 men had entered. 3 of them wore the kind of alert stillness that wasn't relaxation. It was readiness. Their eyes moved constantly, cataloging exits, other guests, the staff. They wore dark jackets cut to conceal things I didn't let myself think about too clearly. One of them, the broadest, with a jaw like a quarried stone, took a position near the partition, rather than sitting. He wasn't dining. He was working. The 4th man sat down. He was younger than I'd expected. That was the first thing. The men who came to section 4 were usually older, silver-haired, with the particular exhaustion of people who'd spent decades making decisions. This one couldn't have been more than 32, maybe 33. Dark hair, slightly longer than conservative, swept back without product, a charcoal suit that required no effort to look extraordinary. He sat the way men sit when they've never had to compete for space, fully, unhurriedly, as if the chair had been waiting specifically for him. His face was... I made myself look away. I finished with table 12, set the water pitcher on my tray, and walked to section 4. Good evening. My voice came out steady. I was proud of that. Welcome to Palazzo Nero. My name is Claire. I'll be taking care of you tonight. 3 of the 4 men barely acknowledged me. The 4th, the one who mattered, apparently, given the way the others oriented toward him like compass needles, looked up. His eyes were dark. Not dramatically dark. Not the kind described in the novels my college roommate used to read. Simply dark, and very still, and carrying the specific quality of someone accustomed to measuring things, people, situations, risk. He measured me for exactly 2 seconds. Then he picked up the menu. Water for the table, he said. His accent carried something European beneath the English, Italian, rounded and unhurried. And whatever Rosario recommends. Of course. I gathered the remaining menus from the 2 empty seats. Are you expecting additional guests? A pause. Brief, but deliberate. No. I nodded and left. Behind me, I heard him say something low in Italian to one of the men. I didn't catch it. I'd taken 2 semesters of Spanish in college and retained almost none of it, which made me essentially useless linguistically. Something I'd never considered a liability until this particular moment. The dinner service moved forward. I brought water. I brought bread. I took the order. 3 of them ate. The 4th, the standing guard, declined. And I relayed it to the kitchen with the shorthand Rosario had drilled into us. I was professional. I was efficient. I was invisible. The way I'd learned to be. But I noticed things. The way the man... I heard one of the others address him once. A single syllable, Marco. Never touched his phone unnecessarily. It sat beside his plate, face down, and he checked it with the calm economy of someone used to information arriving on schedule rather than impulse. The way his posture never fully relaxed, even when he leaned back in the chair, wine glass stemmed between 2 fingers, apparently at ease. The ease was architecture, constructed carefully. Underneath it, something else lived. Something attentive and cold and very, very awake. The other guests left him mostly to speak when spoken to. A question from the one with the gray-streaked hair. An answer from Marco. Brief, precise. The men ate. I refilled glasses. The dinner service moved toward its end with the slow grace of a well-rehearsed performance. I was reaching across to retrieve a bread plate when I heard it. Low voices from the table. The gray-haired man had leaned in, speaking quietly in Italian. Rapid, murmured, serious. I wasn't meant to hear. Wasn't meant to understand. But something in my brain, some misfiring connection I couldn't explain, caught a handful of words from those 2 semesters of Spanish that must have overlapped with something. Macchina, car, domani, tomorrow. And then a word I'd seen in a news article 6 months ago during some case I'd half followed while eating breakfast, a word that needed no translation in any language. Bomba. I set the bread plate on my tray. My hands were steady. I didn't know how. The gray-haired man sat back, and the conversation resumed at normal volume, casual, as if nothing had been said. Marco took a sip of wine. His eyes drifted over the room in that slow, architectural sweep he did every few minutes. They landed on me, and I realized, with a cold drop of something in my chest, that I'd stopped moving. I'd stopped moving, and I was staring, and the bread plate on my tray was trembling very slightly because my hands, apparently, were not as steady as I'd believed. His gaze sharpened, not into anger, into something more precise than that, a question without words, directed at me with the kind of focus that made the rest of the room fall away. I set the tray down on the service station, turned back to the table, walked to him, because the alternative, walking away, going home, pretending I hadn't heard, was something I couldn't make my body do. I leaned down. I didn't let myself think about the guard near the partition, or the other 2 men at the table, or what any of this meant, or what might happen to me for saying it. I spoke at the edge of his ear. Quiet. Direct. Don't get in that car. He went very still. The stillness was different from his usual composure. This one had edges. I straightened. I picked up the tray. I walked back to the service station on legs that had gone strangely numb, and I focused on the wine glasses in front of me. The streaks, the light, the methodical work of polishing them. While every nerve in my body screamed that I had just made a catastrophic mistake. Behind me, I heard the sound of a chair being pushed back. He didn't call my name. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, in that quiet, accented English that somehow carried across every ambient sound in the restaurant, "Come here." 2 words. The kind that didn't leave room for interpretation. I set the wine glass down. My reflection stared back at me from its polished surface. Pale, dark-eyed, hair escaping from the knot at the back of my neck in the way it always did by the end of a shift. I looked exactly like what I was. A tired woman in a stained uniform who had just inserted herself into something she had no business touching. I turned around and walked back to Section 4. The other 3 men at the table had shifted. Not dramatically. No one had stood. No one had reached for anything. but their attention had consolidated in a way that made the air feel thinner. The gray-haired man was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. The one nearest the partition had turned fully to face me, arms loose at his sides. Marco was still seated. That, somehow, was more unsettling than if he'd stood. "Sit down," he said. I looked at the empty chair across from him. "I'm working." "Sit down." It wasn't louder the second time. It didn't need to be. I sat. He studied me the way he'd studied the room earlier, that slow architectural assessment. Except now I was the room, every detail catalogued, my hands on the table in front of me, the ink stain near my second button, the slight unevenness in my breathing that I was doing a poor job of concealing. "What did you hear?" he asked. "I'm not sure what you mean." "You stopped moving." His voice was level, almost academic. "You were clearing the table and you stopped. Then you came to me with something to say." He tilted his head by a fraction. "What did you hear?" The gray-haired man murmured something in Italian. Marco didn't look at him. Didn't acknowledge it at all, actually, which seemed in itself to be an acknowledgement of a particular kind. I thought about lying. Measured the distance between this table and the kitchen exit, calculated, in some cold and separate part of my brain, that whatever I thought I might do didn't particularly matter, because the man near the partition hadn't moved, and he didn't need to move to make his purpose clear. "A few words," I said. I don't speak Italian. Not really. I recognize some of them." "Which words?" I held his gaze. It was difficult. Not because of fear, or not only because of fear, but because looking directly at him required a particular kind of effort, like holding your hand near a flame long enough to feel the heat without pulling back. "Car," I said. "Tomorrow. And..." I paused. Bomb silence. Not the comfortable silence of a well-run restaurant at the end of the evening. The other kind. The kind with weight. "You understood 3 words of a private conversation," Marco said. "And you came to warn me." "Yes." "Why?" It wasn't a question. Or it was. But not the kind that wanted a polished answer. It was the kind that wanted the unfiltered truth. And something in his expression told me he'd know the difference. "Because I have a daughter," I said. "She's 4. And every decision I make, I think about what I'd want someone to do if our positions were reversed." I let a breath out slowly, that's all. "That's the whole reason." Something moved through his expression. Quickly, almost imperceptibly, like a current running under still water. Then it was gone. He looked at the gray-haired man, a glance. 3 seconds, carrying what appeared to be an entire conversation. The man sat back slightly, not chastened, recalibrated. Marco reached into his jacket. Slowly, I noticed, as if aware that sudden movements near a frightened person were counterproductive, and placed a phone on the table. He typed something and turned it toward me. A photo, a car. Black, sleek, the kind that existed to be invisible while announcing importance. "This car?" he asked. I only heard the word. I don't know which car." He retrieved the phone, looked at it for a moment, then he put it away. "Your name," he said. "Claire." "Claire." He repeated it without inflection, testing the weight of it. "How long have you worked here?" 8 months. "Do you live close?" The question landed differently than the others. More careful. I felt the shape of it before I understood it. "Why does that matter?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for his wine glass, took a single slow sip, and set it back with a precision that seemed to be more about time than thirst. "It matters," he said, "because you've heard something that other people would very much prefer you hadn't." His tone didn't change. That was the most frightening part, the complete absence of threat in his voice, as though what he was saying was simply weather, a fact of geography. "It would be inconvenient for you to be alone tonight." The heat in the restaurant suddenly felt inadequate. "I'm fine," I said. My voice was steady. I was becoming genuinely impressed by how consistently my voice refused to reflect what the rest of me was feeling. "I'm not asking." He said it gently. That was the wrong word. "Precisely" was better. "Precisely," and with finality. "Enzo will take you home. He'll confirm your address is safe and remain nearby until morning." The broad man near the partition, Enzo, apparently, moved to the edge of my peripheral vision without being summoned. "I can't just leave," I said. "My shift doesn't end for another hour." "I'll speak with Rosario." "You know Rosario?" Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, the architecture of amusement, the scaffolding before the feeling. "Everyone on this street knows Rosario," he said. "He's been here longer than the building." I looked down at my hands on the table, thought about Lily at home with Mrs. Hendricks from the second floor, the woman who babysat for reduced rent and always left the television on too loud. Thought about the 3 words I'd heard and what they meant, and the fact that I was currently sitting in a Section 4 chair having a conversation that had no version of itself, in which I was simply a waitress going home after her shift. "Okay," I said, because what else was there? Marco nodded once. The conversation was concluded, apparently, with the efficiency of a man who didn't revisit decisions. I stood. Then I stopped, because something compelled me. Some reflex of the person I'd been before 8 months of invisibility had sandpapered it down. "Are you going to be careful?" I asked. He looked up at me, that direct, unreadable gaze that held everything and gave back almost nothing. "Yes," he said, "because I didn't do that for—" I stopped, steadied myself. "I didn't lean in and say that to you because I expected anything in return. I just want you to actually take it seriously." The silence stretched for several seconds. "I take everything seriously," he said. And something in the way he said it, low, measured, almost personal, made me believe him in a way that had nothing to do with reassurance and everything to do with the particular truth that some people carry in their voices like a frequency. Enzo appeared at my elbow, discreet, solid, waiting. I walked out of Section 4. Behind me I heard Marco speaking Italian in a voice so low it barely existed, but the tone had changed, stripped of the architectural ease, replaced by something precise and cold and purposeful. I collected my coat from the staff room. Rosario was there, leaning against the lockers, arms folded, face arranged in an expression I'd never seen on him before. "Go," he said. Just that. I went. The night air outside hit me like cold water. Enzo was already at the car, black, unsurprisingly, idling at the curb. He opened the rear door without ceremony. I got in. The leather was warm. The windows were tinted in a way that made the city outside look like a photograph from another life. I gave him my address. He didn't repeat it, didn't type it into a phone, just nodded and pulled into traffic with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd driven these streets in the dark too many times to count. I stared out the window. My reflection hovered over the passing lights. I thought about what I'd said, "Don't get in that car." I thought about the fact that I didn't know which car, that I'd heard 3 words of a language I barely grasped, and walked straight to the most dangerous man in that room, and delivered a warning as if I had any business doing so. I thought about Lily, asleep at home, completely unaware that her mother had just introduced herself, however briefly, to a world that operated by rules she'd never been taught. The car stopped in front of my building. Enzo waited until I was inside the lobby before pulling away. I knew because I watched through the glass door. He didn't leave. He parked across the street. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. Let myself in quietly. Mrs. Hendricks was dozing in the armchair, the television murmuring, and Lily was a small warm shape under her blanket in the bedroom, her breath slow and even and completely untouched by anything that had happened tonight. I sat on the edge of the bed beside her for a long time, just sat there, in the dark, listening to her breathe. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. A single message. "The car has been checked. You were right. Get some sleep, Claire." I stared at it until the screen went dark. I didn't sleep. I lay beside Lily with my phone face down on the nightstand and my eyes open, watching the shadows on the ceiling shift as the occasional car moved through the street below. At some point after 2 a.m, I got up and stood at the window. Enzo's car was still there, a dark rectangle beneath the amber wash of the street lamp. Motionless. Patient in the way that only professionals managed. Not the stillness of waiting, but the stillness of simply being present without friction. I told myself it was unsettling. Watched it for 10 minutes anyway, By morning, the car was gone. The street was ordinary. Delivery trucks, a woman walking a dog, the bakery across the way pulling its metal grate up with a sound like a slow exhale. I made coffee. I got Lily dressed and fed and walked her the 4 blocks to her preschool with her small hand in mine, and the particular silence of someone carrying something they hadn't found language for yet. She looked up at me twice on the walk. The second time, she said, "Mama, your face is doing the thinking thing." "What thinking thing?" "The wrinkle." She pointed at the space between my eyebrows with one decisive finger. I smoothed it deliberately. "Better?" "A little," she said, which was an honest answer, and I loved her fiercely for it. I kissed her at the school gate and watched her run toward a cluster of children near the climbing structure, with the complete and total commitment to joy that belonged exclusively to 4-year-olds. Then I walked back to my apartment, made a second cup of coffee I didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone. The message was still there. "The car has been checked. You were right. Get some sleep, Claire." I'd typed 3 different replies in the night and deleted all of them. Now I read it again and understood, in the flat morning light, that there was no version of responding that didn't deepen whatever this was. So I set the phone face down and went to get ready for work. Palazzo Nero was different during the day. The amber lighting was replaced by the flat practicality of preparation. Deliveries arriving at the back, the kitchen sharp with the smell of stock and fresh herbs, Rosario moving through the dining room with his reading glasses on and a clipboard in his hand. The velvet drapes were tied back. The tables were bare. Without its evening costume, the restaurant looked like what it actually was, a place of serious, unglamorous labor. Rosario saw me come in and said nothing. That itself was notable. He always had something to say about punctuality, about the ink stain, about some minor deviation from his meticulous standards. Today he looked at me, looked back at his clipboard, and turned toward the kitchen. "Rosario," I said. He stopped. "Last night." "Not here," he said, without turning around. His voice was different, quieter, like a man choosing words with awareness of the walls around him. "Do your prep. Work your section. Go home when your shift ends. I just need to know if... Claire." He turned then, and his face carried an expression I'd never seen from him in 8 months. Not unkindness. Something older than that. Something tired and careful. Some things you know and you keep walking. "You understand me?" I understood him. I changed into my uniform. I began my prep. By the time the dinner service started, I'd almost managed to arrange my thoughts into something functional. Almost. I was pouring water at table 9 when the entrance shifted again. That same atmospheric pressure change I'd felt the night before, the room adjusting itself around a new presence. I didn't look up. I finished pouring, moved to table 10, maintained the practiced efficiency of someone who had not spent the previous night staring at a car parked outside her window. "Section 4 is yours again tonight, Rosario," at my shoulder low. I looked at him. "Go," he said. I walked to section 4. Marco was already seated, alone this time. No gray-haired man, no second dinner companion, only Enzo near the partition, and a second guard I hadn't seen before. Younger, with close-cropped hair and the same alert stillness they all carried like a second skin. He looked up when I approached, no menu in his hands this time. "Claire," he said. "Mr. Conti." I reached for the menus. "Sit down." "I'm working, yes." The faintest shift at the corner of his mouth. "Sit down anyway." I sat. There was no architecture of resistance available to me that I hadn't already dismantled the previous evening. He studied me for a moment. "You look tired." "I'm fine." I said you look tired. I didn't ask if you were fine. He said it without sharpness, but with the particular directness of someone who considered social softening to be a form of imprecision. "Did you sleep?" "Some." "The message worried you." It wasn't a question. I answered it anyway. "You confirmed that someone put a bomb in your car. That doesn't exactly produce restful sleep." He was quiet for a moment. Something moved through his expression. Not the architectural ease from before. Not the cold precision of the man who'd spoken Italian in the dark. Something less managed than either. "The car was swept before I left," he said. It was handled. Handled, I repeated. Yes. I looked at the table. At the fresh flowers I'd arranged myself. White roses tonight because the florist had been out of the usual stock. And the person who arranged it? A pause that answered the question more completely than words would have. Also handled, he said. I nodded. I didn't ask what that meant. There were shapes in this world I was smart enough not to force into full definition. You have a daughter, he said. I looked up sharply. You told me last night, he said, reading my expression. 4 years old. Yes. Her father? The question landed with the bluntness of someone who'd decided that efficiency mattered more than delicacy. I felt a familiar compression in my chest, the one that appeared reliably whenever that particular territory was approached. Not in the picture, I said. Marco's eyes held mine. By his choice or yours? His. The word came out flat. Finished. The whole story compressed into a single syllable. Something shifted in his jaw. Slight, controlled, but there. A tightening that suggested the answer had produced a reaction he'd chosen not to voice. I want to move you, he said. I stared at him. Your building. He said it as a logistical matter, the way someone might discuss a structural problem requiring a practical solution. It's not secure. One entrance. Street-level windows. Enzo confirmed it last night. Enzo was checking my building's security. He was ensuring you were safe. The assessment was a natural consequence. He tilted his head slightly. There's a property on the north side. Quiet street, proper security, building staff. I'd like you to move there. The restaurant continued around us. Glasses and silverware and low conversation, the jazz record beginning its nightly loop. I sat in the middle of it and felt the particular vertigo of a person whose life has taken a turn so sharp the horizon is no longer where it should be. Mr. Conti, I said carefully. Marco. The name felt strange in my mouth, too familiar for what we were, too small for what he apparently was. I warned you because it was the right thing to do. That's finished. You don't owe me anything, and I don't need... I know what you need better than you think, he said, not arrogantly, with a certainty that was somehow worse. Because it didn't feel like presumption, it felt like information. You work a full dinner service 5 nights a week. You walk your daughter to school in the mornings. You live on the 3rd floor of a building with a broken intercom, I noticed when Enzo reported it. You are managing everything alone, and you're doing it well. But you did something last night that connected you to me, and that connection has consequences I won't leave you to absorb without protection. The silence between us had a texture, dense and warm and slightly airless. Why do you care? I asked, quietly, genuinely. He looked at me for a long moment, that measuring look, but different now. Less architectural, more exposed, like a window that had been opened by accident and couldn't quite be closed before the outside air got in. Because you leaned in, he said, and told me something that saved my life. And you did it without asking for anything. In my world, Claire, that is... He paused, choosing the word with visible deliberateness. Rare, I sat with that. Outside, the city moved through its evening. Somewhere across it, Lily was with Mrs. Hendricks, the television too loud, her small world completely intact. I thought about the broken intercom, the street-level windows, the things I'd never quite let myself worry about in the concentrated effort of simply keeping everything running. I'll think about it, I said. It wasn't agreement. But it wasn't refusal either, and from the way Marco looked at me, steady, patient, and with the particular quality of someone entirely accustomed to waiting for outcomes he'd already decided on, I understood that he knew the difference. He picked up the menu. What does Rosario recommend tonight? He asked. And just like that, the conversation was set aside, filed somewhere precise and inaccessible, to be retrieved at a moment of his choosing. I stood, smoothed my uniform, reached for my notepad. The Branzino, I said. He always recommends the Branzino. Then that, he said, without looking up. I walked back to the service station. My hands were not shaking, but when I reached for the water pitcher, I stood there for a full 30 seconds before I remembered what I'd come for. I moved 3 weeks later. I told myself it was practical. The north side building had a doorman, a secured entrance, an elevator that didn't require holding your breath between floors 2 and 3. The apartment itself was twice the size of my current one, with a second bedroom for Lily and a kitchen window that caught the morning light in a way that made the whole room feel like something from a life I'd given up imagining. I told myself those were the reasons. I didn't examine the others too carefully. Marco had arranged everything with the same logistical efficiency he apparently applied to all problems requiring solutions. A lease appeared. My name on it. Real terms, not a gift dressed as one. He'd understood, without being told, that charity would have been refused. The rent was slightly below market, not insultingly so. Just enough to be possible on a waitress's salary, which told me he'd looked into what a waitress's salary actually was, and that knowledge sat in my chest with a warmth I didn't entirely trust. Lily loved it immediately and completely, the way 4-year-olds love things, without reservation or condition. She claimed the second bedroom by running into it and spinning in a circle with her arms out, which was apparently her method of territorial acquisition. She named the kitchen window the sunshine spot and dragged a chair there every morning to eat her cereal. I watched her and felt the complicated texture of gratitude mixed with unease. The two didn't resolve neatly. Marco came to Palazzo Nero twice a week now. Always section 4. Always Enzo at the partition. The visits had a rhythm. Dinner. Conversation that began with logistics and gradually became something less categorizable. And then he would leave, and I would finish my shift and walk home through streets that felt different than they had 3 months ago. More observed. Not unpleasantly. That was the part I kept examining, the fact that the awareness of being watched had stopped feeling like surveillance and started feeling like something closer to the opposite of alone. We talked about Lily. That had happened gradually, the way water finds its way through stone. Not dramatically, just persistently. He asked questions with the focused attention he brought to everything, and I answered them. And somewhere in the answering, I realized I was describing her in ways I rarely had the occasion to. Her particular laugh, the way she reasoned through problems with the gravity of a small philosopher, the drawings she made that were technically indecipherable, but emotionally precise. Marco listened without performing listening. He didn't nod at timed intervals or produce the expected affirmations. He simply took in what I said and occasionally asked a follow-up that revealed he'd retained everything with the accuracy of a man who cataloged information by instinct. "She sounds like you," he said one evening. "She's 4. "Exactly," he said, as though that settled something. I didn't ask what he meant. Some things were safer as suggestions than as fully formed sentences. What I didn't talk about, what existed in the space between what was said and what was understood, was the other thing. The thing that had no clean name in the vocabulary of a woman who served tables and walked her daughter to school and had spent the better part of a year perfecting the skill of not wanting things she couldn't have. He noticed everything. That was the problem. When I came to section 4 with a tension headache I hadn't mentioned, he shortened the dinner without comment and sent me home an hour early through Rosario, who relayed the instruction with the careful neutrality of a man navigating a situation he'd decided not to have opinions about. When I arrived one Thursday with a bruise on my forearm from where I'd caught it on the stockroom door, Marco's eyes went to it once, and then his expression went somewhere very quiet for the rest of the evening. And the following day, a man I didn't recognize came to reinforce the stockroom door's latch without explanation. It was the accumulation of these things that was dangerous, not any single gesture, but the pattern they formed, the shape of sustained, meticulous attention. I was carrying a tray back from section 4 on a Wednesday when a woman appeared in the dining room. She was striking in the manner of people who'd been told so often enough that it had become their natural posture. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a dress that had cost more than my monthly rent. She walked through Palazzo Nero's main room with a proprietorial ease that made the other guests shift their weight, and she was heading directly for section 4 with the purposefulness of someone who had been here before. Many times before. Rosario materialized at her side. Low words, her chin lifted. I kept moving. Set my tray down at the service station. Began the mechanical work of organizing glasses. But I heard her voice when she reached the partition. warm, fluent Italian, and the particular tone of familiarity that belongs to shared history. Long history. The kind that doesn't require negotiating space, because it assumes the space is already its own. Enzo didn't move aside for her immediately. A pause. And that pause meant something, because Enzo moved for no one without a signal. A signal came, apparently. She entered Section 4. I did not look. I focused on the glasses with a precision that was somewhat in excess of what the task required. 20 minutes later, Rosario appeared at my shoulder. Take your break. I just came back from, take your break, Claire. I took my break. I sat in the staff room with a glass of water and the particular internal silence of a person performing the work of not feeling something. It was familiar work. I was practiced at it. I did it the way I did most things, efficiently, without complaint, with a clean surface that gave nothing away. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. But I knew the rhythm of it by now. Come back to the floor. She's leaving. I stared at the message, read it 3 times, felt the warmth of it, and the wrongness of feeling that warmth in equal measure. I typed, "That's not your call to make." The response came in under a minute. "No, but I'm making it anyway." I put the phone in my pocket and went back to the floor. The woman was gone. Section 4 was empty except for Marco, one hand around his wine glass, his posture carrying the slight rigidity of someone recently irritated. He looked up when I came through the partition. "She's a business associate," he said before I'd spoken. "You don't owe me an explanation." "I know I don't." His eyes held mine steadily. "I'm offering one." I set down the water pitcher I'd brought as occupational cover. "Is she dangerous?" Something crossed his expression. Surprise, almost. "To you?" "To you." The surprise deepened into something I couldn't fully name. He looked at me for a long moment, and in the amber light of Section 4, with the jazz record turning slowly, and the rest of the restaurant existing at a comfortable distance, he looked, briefly, unguardedly, like a man who was not entirely accustomed to being asked that question. "No," he said, "not anymore." I nodded. Picked up the water pitcher. "Claire." I stopped. "Don't do that," he said. "Do what?" "Go quiet." His voice was low, completely level. "You do it when you're retreating somewhere I can't see, and I don't—" He paused, the word chosen with care. "Prefer it." The restaurant hummed around us. I stood at the edge of Section 4 with a water pitcher in my hand and felt the full, inconvenient weight of what had been accumulating between us for weeks, months, the entire length of this thing that had no proper name. "This is complicated," I said. "Yes, I have a daughter. I have a life that doesn't have room for complicated." "You already have complicated," he said. "You moved into one of my buildings. You eat dinner at my table twice a week. You text me back at 11 at night when you can't sleep." He said none of it with triumph, only with the same precise honesty he brought to everything. "Complicated is already here, Claire. The question is what you do with it." I had no answer for that, not an honest one. I refilled his glass. My hands were steady. I was still proud of that, in the diminishing portion of my brain that had room for anything as simple as pride. "I'll see you Thursday," he said. The ease was back in place, architectural, careful. "Thursday," I said. I walked back to the service station. The bruise on my forearm had faded to yellow at the edges. Outside, through the restaurant's front window, I could see Enzo's car parked at the curb, waiting with its particular patient permanence. The thing about being watched, I'd learned, was that after long enough, you stopped feeling the absence of it more than the presence. That was the most dangerous discovery of all. The call came on a Tuesday, not from Marco, from a number I didn't recognize. A man's voice, accented and clipped, delivering 4 sentences with the efficiency of someone reading from a prepared script. Lily's preschool. An incident. Come immediately. Don't call anyone. The last instruction was the one that told me everything. I was out of the apartment before I'd finished processing it. Coat half on, keys in my fist. The cold morning air hitting me like a wall as I came through the building's secured entrance. Enzo's replacement, a quieter man named Sal who'd taken the curb position 3 weeks ago, was already outside, which meant he'd been watching the building's security feed and had seen me leave at a run. The school, I said. He was already moving to the car. We were 4 blocks away when my phone buzzed. "Marco, don't go to the school," he said before I could speak. His voice was the version I'd only heard twice before, stripped of everything architectural, carrying the cold precision of someone operating in a register where mistakes had permanent consequences. "Lily is safe. She's with me." The world tilted. "What?" "She's safe, Claire. Listen to my voice." A pause. I listened, steady, controlled, completely certain. "Someone moved her this morning before you received the call. My people intercepted it. She is with me at the Meridian property. She is unharmed. And she has eaten half a croissant and is currently drawing on a notepad that Enzo provided." A sound escaped me that I didn't plan. Something between a breath and a word that never formed. "I'm coming," I said. "Sal knows the address." Sal already had the car moving in a different direction. I sat in the back seat with my hands pressed flat against my thighs and focused on breathing with the mechanical discipline of someone who understood that falling apart was a luxury unavailable to her right now. The Meridian property was a townhouse on a street so quiet it seemed to exist slightly outside the city's awareness. Mature trees, stone facades, no foot traffic. Sal pulled to the front, and I was out before the car fully stopped. The door opened before I reached it. Enzo. Behind him, a wide hallway, warm light, and then, Mama. Lily came around the corner at the particular velocity she reserved for moments of high emotion. Full speed, arms already extended. I dropped to my knees on the hallway floor and caught her, and held on with both arms and my whole body and every compressed, contained thing I'd been carrying since the phone rang, and I pressed my face into her hair and breathed. She smelled like croissant and the specific warmth of a child who has been well looked after. "There was a man," she said into my shoulder, matter-of-factly, because she processed events with the directness of someone who hadn't yet learned to dress fear in socially acceptable clothing. "He tried to take my hand, but the other man said no very loudly. And then I came here and Marco gave me juice." I pulled back and looked at her face. Untroubled, curious, completely intact. "Are you okay?" My voice came out rough. "Yes." She tilted her head with an expression borrowed directly from me, the assessing one, the one that sorted information before responding. "Are you okay, Mama? Your face is doing the wrinkle." I smoothed it, kissed her forehead. Stood. Marco was at the end of the hallway. He looked different. The suit was the same, the composure largely assembled, but there was something underneath it that hadn't been there in Section 4. Something raw. His eyes went over me the way they'd gone over every room I'd ever watched him enter, checking, cataloging, but this time what they were checking for was different. Personal in a way that had nothing to do with exits and everything to do with me specifically. My face, my steadiness, whether I was intact. "Come," he said. Lily took my hand and led me forward, as though she were the guide and I were the one who needed orienting. We sat in a room at the back of the townhouse, high ceilings, bookshelves, morning light through tall windows. Lily installed herself on a leather ottoman with the notepad and a collection of pens someone had organized for her, with the kind of thoroughness that suggested Marco had given specific instructions. She drew with total absorption, her small tongue at the corner of her mouth. Marco told me what had happened with the compressed clarity he brought to information delivery. The call had been a distraction, someone connected to the gray-haired man from the first dinner, a loose thread he'd believed was handled. One that had unraveled in a direction he hadn't fully anticipated. They'd intended to use Lily as leverage. His people had been monitoring the school as a precaution for weeks, a precaution he hadn't mentioned because he'd judged it unnecessary information at the time. "You didn't tell me," I said. "No, you had people watching my daughter's school and you didn't think I needed to know that." He held my gaze. I made a judgment call. It was wrong. The admission came without decoration. No softening, no justification, just the clean acknowledgement of error from a man who I understood did not make many of them, and found this one specifically unacceptable. "I should have told you. I'm telling you now." The anger was there, real and justified, and I let it exist without apology. "Is it over?" I asked. "Yes, absolute." The word carried the weight of something already concluded. The person responsible. Handled. I looked at Lily on the ottoman. She had drawn apparently a house, tall, with many windows, and 4 figures in front of it of varying heights. She held it up toward the light to examine it critically. "This is us," she announced, to the room in general. "This is me, this is Mama, this is the big man," she pointed at the largest figure. "And this is the other big man," she considered it. "I didn't know what color your eyes are," she told Marco, with the apologetic practicality of an artist explaining a technical limitation. Marco looked at the drawing. Something happened in his face that I had no framework for, a dissolving of the last layer of architectural ease, replaced by something unguarded and completely genuine, the expression of a man unexpectedly moved by a small person with a pen. "Dark," he said, "like the color of good coffee." Lily nodded gravely, and added this information to the figure with a brown pen. I watched him watch her. The morning light came through the tall windows and lay across the bookshelves and the leather ottoman and my daughter's bent head, and the face of a man who moved through the world in armored cars and spoke in rooms swept for listening devices, and had built around himself an entire architecture of controlled distance. Watching her draw his eyes in brown and being, for this one undefended moment, simply present. Something in me resolved, not dramatically, not in the way of conclusions reached through argument. Quietly, the way water settles. We stayed at the Meridian property for 3 days, while Marco's people confirmed that the situation was completely contained. I slept in a room with Lily, her warm weight pressed against my side. And each morning I woke to the smell of coffee from downstairs and the sound of her voice asking questions of whoever was unfortunate enough to be in the kitchen. On the 3rd morning, Marco was in the kitchen. Lily was explaining to him, at considerable length and with many supporting gestures, her theory about why clouds were actually very slow animals. He was listening with his full attention, elbows on the counter, coffee cup in hand, responding to each point with the seriousness it apparently deserved. I stood in the doorway and let it exist for a moment before either of them saw me. Then Lily spotted me and the moment opened up to include me, and Marco looked over his shoulder, and his expression did the thing it had been doing more and more frequently, losing its architecture, becoming simply his face, the one underneath the one he showed the world. "She believes clouds migrate," he said. "Seasonally," Lily clarified. "She makes a compelling case," he said. I poured coffee and sat at the counter across from them, and the morning light came through the kitchen window and lay across the 3 of us, warm and entirely ordinary, and I thought about a different kitchen window that Lily called the sunshine spot, and about how the geography of ordinary life was less fixed than I'd believed. That afternoon, after Lily had exhausted herself on the townhouse's small garden and fallen asleep on the leather ottoman with the notepad under her cheek, Marco and I sat in the book-lined room, and he told me the rest of it. Not the operational details. Those remained in their compressed, handled form. But the other things. The things he'd carried since he was 19, and inherited a world he hadn't chosen, but had refused to abandon because the people inside it were his. And loyalty was the one currency he'd never devalued. A younger brother. A mother he'd moved to a house in the northern countryside where the air was clean. The particular loneliness of a life lived behind glass, watching ordinary things from a protected distance. I told him about Lily's father, the complete version, not the single compressed syllable. A man who'd wanted the idea of a family and discovered the reality of one required more than he'd brought to the transaction. Who'd left when Lily was 6 weeks old with a text message and no forwarding address. The long work of rebuilding from a deficit, the specific pride of having done it, the exhaustion I'd stopped acknowledging because acknowledging it meant feeling it. We talked until the room went dark, and the city outside the tall windows became a pattern of lit windows and moving lights. "I want to ask you something," Marco said. "And I want you to answer honestly, not protectively. Those are sometimes the same thing." "Not this time." He looked at me across the low table between us, the direct gaze that gave back almost nothing, and somehow everything simultaneously. "Do you want this? Not the building, not the protection. This." The word encompassed the kitchen and the morning light, and the drawing with the brown eyes, and every dinner in Section 4, and the messages at 11 at night, and the particular, inconvenient, fully formed thing that had been building between us since a woman in a stained uniform leaned in and spoke 4 words at the edge of a dangerous man's ear. "I want to be honest with you," I said. "That's all I'm asking. It frightens me. I know. Not you specifically, the size of it. The weight of it. I've been managing everything in small increments for 4 years because small increments are survivable. And this is..." I gestured at the air between us, inadequately. "This is not a small increment." "No," he agreed. "But," I said. He waited. "I stopped being able to imagine going back to before," I said. "To not knowing you. And I've been arguing with that fact for weeks, but it's still true, and I think at some point the honest thing is to stop arguing with true things." The silence between us was warm. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his, deliberate, certain, a gesture that contained no performance and no strategy. Just the straightforward warmth of a man who'd decided on something and was done with the distance that had preceded it. "Lily's going to want to show me the sunshine spot," he said. "She'll also want to explain her cloud theory to you again, in more detail." "I have time," he said. And the simple, complete truth of that, the word time from a man who'd spent years operating in a world where it was the scarcest possible resource, settled over the room like light coming through a tall window on a clear morning. Clean and warm and without shadow. We went home 4 days later, all 3 of us, because by then home had quietly expanded its definition to include the people who filled it, not just the address on a lease. Lily dragged Marco to the sunshine spot immediately and made him sit in her chair to verify the quality of the light, which he did with complete seriousness, and declared adequate. And she accepted this judgment with the satisfaction of someone whose instincts have been properly validated. The gray-haired man's network was dismantled over the following months. I knew this the way I knew many things now, in outline rather than detail, which was the honest shape of the life I'd chosen. Marco was careful with what he shared, and I was careful with what I asked, and in that mutual carefulness we found a balance that was less compromise than genuine fit. Rosario retired in the spring. He shook my hand on his last day and held it for a moment and said, without looking at me directly, "You did good, kid." Which was, from Rosario, a soliloquy. I left Palazzo Nero 2 months later, not for any dramatic reason, but because a position opened at a hospitality group on the north side, daytime hours, and the shift meant I could walk Lily to school every morning and be home when she returned. It was a smaller salary for the first 6 months. Marco said nothing about this. He'd learned with admirable accuracy which things I needed to handle myself and which ones I'd accept help with, and he never confused the two. Lily turned 5 in September. Her birthday party involved 8 small children, an excessive quantity of balloons, and Marco sitting on the floor of the Sunshine Spot kitchen, assembling a craft kit with the focused gravity of a man accustomed to high-stakes operations, which apparently transferred directly to the construction of a small paper castle. She named the castle after him. He looked at it for a long moment, this small paper thing built by a 5-year-old who had decided, with the complete and absolute authority of a child's instinct, that he belonged in her world. Then he looked at me, and his face was simply his face. No architecture, no constructed ease, just the expression of a man holding something he hadn't known he needed until it was already, quietly, irrevocably his. Some things begin with 4 words spoken into the dark, at the edge of a dangerous man's ear, by a tired woman with an ink stain on her uniform, and a daughter at home and the stubborn, undiminished instinct to do the right thing regardless of consequence. Some things, once begun, simply continue. The way light continues through a window, the way a child's voice continues through a house, the way warmth continues in the space between 2 people who have finally, honestly, stopped arguing with true things.